Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education and you don't want to have to raid your 401k just to pay for it. I am Mark Stucker and I'm a college coach.
And I am Anika Madden and I am a parent. It is Thursday, November 15th, and welcome to episode number 42, Differences Between the ACT and the SAT. In this week's news, we're reviewing an article from The Atlantic, The Rise of College Grade Forgiveness. And we are in chapter 42 of 171 answers, and Mark is walking us through the key differences between the SAT and the ACT. And it's time again for our bonus content during this week's question segment. And Mark is interviewing Ms. Nancy Beane of Westminster Schools, and they're discussing how much emphasis should be placed on prestige in selecting a college.
Anika, are you into politics?
Whoa, just a smidge.
Well, you may not know this, but I'm really into elections. I get into them kind of hardcore. And so I was listening to some of the talking heads, and they were talking about Beto ORourke and his race against Ted Cruz in Texas. And this talking head says, if Beto wins, he's a Texas senator. If he loses by a few points, he becomes a national sensation and he runs for president. And if he loses by 7 or 8 points, he becomes a podcast host.
So what is he right now? Because he didn't win.
No, run for president. I guess he was only 2 or 3. But my point is, what's so bad about being a podcast host? Like, you may as well just said he can be a loser.
How dare you, man.
We love being podcast hosts, no matter what the talking heads say.
That's right, doggone it.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, this week's article, Mark, is The Rise of College Grade Forgiveness. And this is by Mr. Jeffrey Selingo and is found in The Atlantic. And what it's all about is that universities are letting students take classes over again. And this is a response to basically consumer expectations for higher education. Because after all students are customers who should be pleased and satisfied, right? But the differences, Mark, well, at least some of the differences in some of these schools' policies on, retaking these classes, they can differentiate in slightly different ways. But what they're saying in general is that these, what it's allowing these kids to do, or these students to do, is to retake a course in which they received a low grade. And anything that raises GPAs will likely make students feel like they've gotten a better value for their tuition dollars, which is, of course, a huge concern for these colleges. So this great forgiveness, Mark, has increased over the last few years, or actually they're saying over the last couple of decades. And this is to, number one, keep the students in school. And also, which was interesting, this is a push to improve the schools or the institution's graduation rates. So what say you, Mark Stucker, about all of this?
This is a tough one, Anika. Sometimes I'm torn between sort of the pros and the cons. And just in case our listeners are not clear on exactly what grade forgiveness is, basically it's a policy that allows you to retake a course where you got a really low grade. And only the highest grade will count on your GPA, even that both grades show up on your transcript. And so this was something that pretty much was non-existent a few decades ago, as Anika said. And now it's so prevalent that actually 91% of undergraduate colleges are implementing some form of grade forgiveness, and 80% of graduate and professional schools are implementing some form of grade forgiveness. So maybe we can do a little pros and cons about it, because I see real advantages and disadvantages to it. I'll start out with the cons, and some of this, Anika, will be things the article said, and some of it will kind of be my own opinion from my experience, a little bit mixed in. So when you look at the negative side of grade forgiveness, well, one of the things the article pointed out is that they feel like this falls in line with this consumerism. We've talked a lot about the palatial dorms and lazy rivers and all that stuff, climbing walls that are on the colleges, and this consumerism where you're catering toward the customer, whatever the customer wants you give them, and that's not always necessarily what's in their best interest. So that was one of the points the article brought up. Jack Miner at Ohio State is one of the guys who's really outspoken on that. None of the negative points was that it teaches students that their work in a course doesn't really matter, and there's always another chance. I know John Marks, a professor of sociology at Winthrop University, according to the article, he's really been outspoken about that. And another thing is colleges feel as if you repeat a course 5 times, are you really allowing the student to work with faculty members to master the material, or are you just saying to them over and over and over, just keep taking and taking and taking it? So those are some of the negatives. But the biggest negative that I've had, and I've been pretty outspoken in being against this as a policy, Anika, and the reason for that is because what I have seen in this, I've seen this on the high school level and how it's translated to the college level. So what I've seen on the high school level is that when this is practiced on the high school level, the examples that I've used is kind of like have you ever broken your leg or used crutches before, by the way? Anytime you're
Knock on wood. No,
okay.
I have not.
Well, good for you, because I did back in high school, flipping around on the bus after track and field injury. And so you're on your crutches all the time, right? The crutch in this case is, I can always take it again. And then, bang, if you get in a situation where you can't do that, it's like someone pulls the crutch from under you, and then you fall flat on your face because you haven't learned to walk without your crutches. Let me ask you this: Did you have a bicycle when you were a kid?
Yes.
Do you remember having training wheels? Do you remember those things? Training wheels?
I do.
I'm taking you way back here. So that's the other example that I like to use. It's like you're always riding the bike with training wheels, and then all of a sudden you get in the real world and they pull the training wheels out and then you fall flat on your face. So
and that was one of my key questions, because one of the things that it does talk about is that, okay, kid, if you're having to take this class over and over again, is this a wake-up call for you that you might want to reconsider what you're getting yourself into? Maybe this isn't your strong suit or something that you are just cut out to do. And so what is that really encouraging? Because they, at the end of the day, they're going to graduate. But number one, are you going to be workforce ready? Are they going to honestly be prepared to what they're getting themselves into?
I'm so glad you brought that point up, Anika, because that's exactly where I was going. So one of the things I always teach students is that, high school and college are kind of like a microcosm of the workforce world, right? So in the workforce, you may have it, because students always say, I don't like this teacher. How do you expect me to get a good grade? I don't like them. Guess what? You may not like your boss. You still got to produce. Right.
Right.
And so the way this correlates to the real world is you may have a report that's due, and you know what? You may not have the option to just say, "Can I have a do-over? I'm not ready for the meeting." But
never had one of those, right?
so that's what I don't like about it. But there are some really, really big positives. So let's talk about some of them.
Okay.
One of the positives the article talked about is, look, as a school, we ultimately have to get people in grad school. And so if it's going to help your GPAs, then it's going to lead to our students being happier. And that's something that a complaint I hear from students that go to schools that grade really, really, really hard. They're like, you're proud of the fact that your average grade is a 2.6, but if I want to get an MBA, do they know that? Is it going to help me get into med school or grad school or law school? So that makes students feel better. It makes them feel like they're getting a good return on their money, because obviously this can help your GPA, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a positive. Another thing is public school state appropriations. The money they receive are often tied to metrics such as their graduation rates and retention data. So if this can help your graduation rate and your retention data, it means your institution can have more money. If you have more money, then you can help more people. So that's a positive. Obviously, there's kind of that esprit de corps. Anything that makes a kid feel like their GPA's higher is sort of going to be good for keeping them in the right state of mind. But one big positive, Anika, and I sort of had to experience this experientially. I drew on this from my own experience. So I don't know if you're aware of this. Do you know that Davidson has a policy that I would call sort of a modified form of grade forgiveness, where at the end of your time at Davidson, and for our first-time listeners, both Anika and I have had kids go to Davidson. My daughter just graduated in May, and Anika's son is about to graduate this May. First-time listeners. But did you know Davidson has a policy where you can drop your 3 lowest grades in any like at the end. Did you know that?
Yeah, I kind of did sort of know that for some strange reason. Hopefully that's not because Jalen's feeling anything. But I feel like I've heard that before.
Actually, Jalen told me his GPA the other day, and he is crushing it. I mean,
Yeah, he's crushing it.
I won't put his GPA out there, but it's not easy to get the GPA that he has at Davidson College. I can tell you that.
Right.
So, but you know what? So Karis is not a science student. So science was, drudgery for her, and it was challenging for her because it's just not her thing. It's never been her thing. And when she dropped those 3 lowest grades at graduation, I saw that GPA go way up. But more importantly, it decreased some of the stress, knowing that you had that policy. And because, and Anika and I, we talked a lot about mental health on this podcast. The fact that it can be conducive to better mental health, I think, is a big positive. So, what do you think, Anika? I'm kind of torn between the positives and the negatives.
Well, let's determine if there's this other positive. Within this policy, it didn't state. Do you have to pay when you take those classes again? Like, how does that work financially?
No, you're gonna pay. Not free.
You pay so that's not a positive.
Well,
I mean, they make it sound like it just comes with the load. Like that's my.
You pay when you take credit hours. You got professors that need to get paid. The only time you don't pay, there are colleges that have as a policy that anything over 15 credit hours is the same. Like 18 credit hours is the same as 15. You know what I mean? There's a flat rate. And actually, each individual school can have their own policy on it. I'm not saying school have the policy that says that you don't pay, but it's not something that I'm familiar with.
Well, big takeaway, students, work hard, first go round, just do what you got to do, and let's try to avoid that at all costs, but just know that it's an option in some cases.
Yeah, I would say just don't get dependent on it, right? Like we were, the article talked about people that were taking stuff 5 times they've done this.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Using it, and so, but if it can help relieve a little stress and get you in higher GPA, hey, I hate to say it. I can rail against it all I want, Anika. Guess what? I'll be the first person that would be using it if I was a student right now. So I guess I was being a little hypocritical to criticize it.
I will be number 2. Thank you. Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Okay, friends, this is the part of our podcast where we try to plug any holes you may have in your understanding of how this college admission process works. And the way we do that is we go chapter by chapter through a book that I wrote called 171 Answers. So we take a couple snippets or excerpts out of that, and we just have a little discussion. And so that book has 171 chapters, and there's actually 65 chapters that deal with how to get in the colleges on your college list. So from episodes 29 all the way to 94, we're going to be talking about some aspect of getting in college. And for a couple months, we're going to be talking about the test scores. And today, the question that we are tackling is, how is the ACT different than the SAT? Now, we've actually talked about this a few times. If you want a real in-depth conversation, my interview with Dr. Jed Appleruth on episodes 28 and 29 was this thorough discussion as you're going to probably see on that subject with the person I regard as the most knowledgeable one in the country. So I don't want to repeat that, and I don't want to repeat some other things we've already said. So I'm going to try to focus on some of the ways the two tests are different that we haven't talked about so far. How does that sound, Anika?
Sounds like a plan.
So what were some of your takeaways from this chapter, Anika? Why don't you kick it off, and I'll throw in a few things.
So the big takeaway is that I was so impressed with how the chapter gives a really great bird's eye view of the two tests. And so I'm so impressed with it, Mark, that when Naya comes home for Thanksgiving break next week, I'm going to have her sit quietly and really read this chapter, because I don't want to run through the whole list, but I think it would just be, I know it is going to be extremely helpful for her to really see the very distinct differences between the two. And I will touch, I will say, so much about, just the vocabulary being a real, a huge emphasis on the SAT, where it seems to me that the ACT is more focused on math. And I know she feels like she settled on the SAT, but who knows? I think I think it's just helpful for her to see and understand why she feels a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that she's got a really, I mean, she's an avid reader. She's a great reader. She's great at math too.
Mm-hmm.
So I just know that this is going to be a huge benefit for her to just look at it and just see, a broad overview of what she's really, just the distinct differences between two. It was just awesome in that way, Mark.
And for our first-time listeners, Anika has an 11th grader. So we talked about her son who's a senior in college, but she has an 11th grader. Mm-hmm. So she's right in the middle of this stuff right now. So that's what she's referring to there. So a couple things that I want to comment on that we haven't talked about in some of our other discussions in the past 41 episodes when this subject's come up. One of them is that the ACT allows you to use your calculator throughout the whole test in the math section, where the SAT has a calculator section and a no calculator section. So now the calculator section is longer than the no calculator section. It's almost double the length of time, but there is still 25 minutes of a no calculator section. So you can't just rely on pulling out that little machine. You got to be able to do math, the old traditional way. Mm-hmm. When it comes to geometry, there's a really big difference because the SAT, only 6% of the test is geometry, and 23% of the math portion of the ACT is geometry. So it's almost a quarter of the ACT math is geometry, where like 1/16 of the math on the SAT is geometry. So sometimes people who are really good or really bad in geometry, that's something for them to kind of be aware of. Another difference is the math on the ACT, it has a lot more advanced topics math, where the ACT is on the SAT. It's algebra 1, algebra 2 mostly, and then there's like word problems and data analysis. But there's a lot more different things covered. Like we already said, more geometry, more pre-calc, more trig, more other advanced types of math. So, anything else you want to say on the math, or should we move on?
No, let's move on. I think that's just it. And I think for these kids to really, really understand that, for them to understand that, is just critical when they're making these decisions. I can't overemphasize that.
And then the science, well, guess what? There is no science section on the SAT. There is on the ACT. And so now it's sort of people get the thing misconstrued a little, because the science is really more of a reading section, but it's reading graphs and charts. But it does require some scientific knowledge. And I often find, Anika, that how people feel about the ACT science section oftentimes significantly influences sort of which test that they like. But the ACT science can be very challenging to complete because there's just a lot of questions to answer in a very short period of time. And so it's very common for people to take this, I never got finished that ACT science section. So that's that's something to think about. Another thing would be the reading. There's a lot more reading on the SAT. There's actually 65 minutes of reading compared to 35 minutes on the ACTs. That's an extra half an hour of reading. And the SAT is interesting because what it does is it has harder questions, like you said, but it gives you more time to answer them. So for example, when you're looking at the reading, the SAT gives you 75 seconds per question compared to 53 seconds per question on the ACT. And this is true for the other sections of the test as well. There's 48 seconds per question on the SAT writing compared to 36 seconds per question on the ACT English. And the English on the ACT would really be the equivalent to the writing on the SAT if you were to compare. And then for the math, it's the same thing. There's you have 83 seconds per question on the SAT versus 60 seconds per question on the math on the ACT. So one of the big issues with the ACT is pacing. You have to be able to move very, very quickly. But I have found a lot of times, Anika, that's one area where people with learning how to do pacing drills and prep, they can significantly improve their ACT skills. Any comments on either the time you have, the extra time, or the science?
The more you know.
So let's keep moving. So we talked about a couple of weeks ago how the SAT was designed to be more of an aptitude or IQ test and how they've moved away from that. But I was talking with a leading ACT SAT scholar this week, Anika, and he said there's still aspects of the SAT that are reminiscent of an IQ test. It's changed dramatically, moving to more of a content-based test. But he said still there are aspects of it. So that's something to think about. And he, according to him, and he's a real guru, he says there's still more cultural bias type questions in the SAT. Now he does some tutoring too with some high powered international students.
Mm-hmm.
And an example he gave is like, you may get a question on the SAT about the women's suffrage movement. And when he's working with international students, they're talking about women suffering. Were they getting tortured? Were they, they know nothing of the context of like 100 years, the right to vote. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that was interesting.
Wow.
Keeping moving, vocab. So 8% of questions on the ACT test your vocabulary versus 17% test your vocabulary on the SAT. So a lot higher vocab is expected for you to know. Once again, that's kind of goes with the reading comprehension, right?
Right.
And a lot of this I'm sharing is actual research done by ORourke and Dr. Jed ORourke. They've done a lot of real research diagnosing the test. So I don't want you listeners to think I know all this stuff at the top of my head. I'm relying a lot on the research that. See, I was even fooling you for a second. No, credit where credit is due.
That's
so
right.
This is interesting. So level of reading comprehension. So when you look at the SAT, and this is the point you brought out, Anika, how the reading level is so much higher.
Mm-hmm.
The average question ranges from 11th grade in high school all the way to senior level in college.
Wow.
That's the age of your two kids.
Right.
Janae is in 11th and Jalen's a senior in college, right? So they test your reading level all the way up to senior level in college, where the ACT, it goes really more from 9th grade level to sophomore in college. So there's like kind of a 2 years more advanced reading. And the same is true for the writing portion, where the SAT, the average level for the SAT is 3 years higher than the average level for the ACT in terms of your knowledge of grammar, your knowledge of writing. But when you say this, Nikki, you would get the sense that the SAT is a harder test. That's not true. The ACT is very much more STEM based, right, with the math and the science, and the SAT leans a lot more to English, humanities type of skills.
All right.
So what do you think?
I think we got some work cut out for us.
Hey, nothing comes easy.
That's right.
It's all good. It's all good.
All good. Okay, this week it's time again for our bonus content. And so, Mark, what we're doing is we're gonna go back to episode number 29, and we're gonna talk about 2 points that you didn't cover in an article by Mr. Brennan Barnard and Mr. Rick Clark on the disconnect between what admissions officers say and what parents hear in the admissions process. So, Mark, you want to go ahead and dive into your 2 points?
Yeah, and Brennan, boy, he's in on 4 or 5 episodes in a row. This is the same.
I know, right? I'm like, wait, is Brennan a co-host?
This is the same Brennan that did the 20 mistakes that parents make, the last 3 episodes, if you heard those. But no, fantastic article. This episode has been our most listened to episode by far, and maybe one reason was this discussion we had. So we want to pick it back up. So they wrote an article in the Washington Post, and it said, admissions officers say this, and this is what parents hear. Nika, why don't you kick it off by sharing the first point we want to discuss today?
Okay, so this is what counselors say. Counselors say, don't get caught up in name and reputation. Just find the college that is the best fit. And here's what students hear. There is a school out there that will be perfect for you.
And I thought this was really, really, really good point because, students hear, oh, there's a perfect school out there for me. And oftentimes what I have to say to students I work with, I say, and I'm very direct, I'm saying, are you perfect? No. And I'll say, guess what? I'm not perfect. Guess what? Your family's not perfect. My family's not perfect. Your school's not perfect. My school's not perfect. So don't go to college expecting your college to be perfect. Because sometimes people can just sort of get confused that when you hear too much about fit and match, that you start thinking, oh, there's utopia out there for me. I had to speak to a student that I'm working with in a different state. I'll just leave it at that. This week about this, because every school that he was visiting, he was finding problems with. And these are amazing schools. And I had to tell him, you're just not, I think you're looking for perfection. And it's important to say this because there are really two perspectives people have on colleges. There's what is the right fit and the right match versus what do the rankings say versus, one place that definitively is best. And I wholeheartedly believe in best match for you, not objective best, right? Like you can't say, whatever, Georgia Tech is better than Georgia. Like you can't say that. For who? For one student, yes. For another student, no, right? So I kind of pushed back on this, Anika, and I'll tell you, there was I'm in this Facebook group with like 15,000 counselors, right? And this guy wrote this article about 3 or 4 months ago, and he was really like lambasting the concept of fit. And I was really like bristling, like I was just recoiling when I read the article because I could feel my blood boiling because I believe so strongly in match and fit. But toward the end, I started softening a little bit because I realized he was kind of over embellishing to make a point. And basically the point what he was making is all this emphasis we're putting on match and fit is leading some people to look for perfection. And therefore, they're not finding anything that matches up with them. So that'd be the first point. Anything else you want to say on that? Counselors say you got to find the right match, and students hear, oh, there's a perfect school for me.
Right. Well, I think that speaks to the one thing we covered before, Mark, when we talk about the transfer rates, that these students are doing after the first semester in school. I think that's a direct reflection of that. So it makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yep. And
all right. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, the one thing that I also want to say is I think one of the things that another mistake we make in the counseling profession is we emphasize happiness so much. Like when you go somewhere, it's going to be the best 4 years of your life. It's going to be a happy experience. And it's not only about happiness, it's about growth. And growth oftentimes, many times, most of the time, growth comes with struggle. So, so if the idea is to go somewhere to be prepared, it shouldn't always be easy. It shouldn't always be fun. And I think sometimes when you emphasize match and fit so much, people don't hear that other side.
That's interesting. Excellent points. Naya, did you hear that?
I'm glad you could apply all this stuff right here and now to your own daughter.
Oh, man. Then little John. All right. So on to our second one. Colleges say our college reviews applications holistically. Test scores are only one small part of the equation. What do students hear? Even though the college's average SAT score is 1,400 and I earned 1,100, I still have a chance of being admitted.
Boy, is there a lot that we can say on this one. What were your thoughts when you first read this one, Anika?
Don't be fooled. Like, don't, slow your roll. It's still important. It's still important. But I mean, I don't know. I think this whole testing, thing is still kind of going over my head a little bit in terms of what has to be and what doesn't have to be. Because I still reflect back on that one school Jalen visited that I absolutely loved. And she was like, oh, we take such and such and such and such and such. And sure enough, in the end, he got admitted. And I don't know. It's one of those. Yeah.
So there was a story they shared in the article, which I liked. It says, perhaps you saw the classic cinematic piece Dumb and Dumber, in which Lloyd Christmas, Jim Carrey, asks hopefully, what are my chances? And Mary Swanson, Lauren Holly, responds 1 in a million. After pausing, he replies with excitement, so you're telling me there's a chance? And that's kind of how that's how it is, right? So now I'm going to go off on my hobby horse a little bit here for a second, Anika. So, sometimes I do that. So this is one of my pet peeves is that a lot of times admissions officers will downplay the role standardized testing plays in the process. They very much will downplay it.
Or overplay it.
Well, sometimes they overplay it, but I don't find that is anywhere near as common as underplaying it. It's very common to say, we look at test scores, but it's not the most important thing in the file. We're looking so much more. So many things are more important than that. And just keep this in mind, friends. Anything that a school asks you for is important or they wouldn't ask you for it. And so it's very common for admission officers to do this. And one of the reasons why they do it, there's one reason that's totally understandable, right? The truth of the matter is, little secret out there, that there are different standards for different people when it comes to testing. So if I'm speaking to a group and I'm doing an information session, I'm going to be fairly vague when it comes to this. Guess why? If you're like the number one running back in the state, it's a different standard for you than the person beside you. If your dad can build a $50 million building and we need a new science center, it's a different standard for you. If your parent is a celebrity and they have their own TV show and we're going to get great publicity because we bring in a celebrity kid in and that's going to lead to publicity, and there's a different standard for you. So because people don't know who is in the audience and there are different standards for different people. Another example, if you come from a first generation, low income family, all the research indicates that test scores are highly correlated to the education levels of the parents. So schools are aware of that, and schools that do holistic admission will take your socioeconomic education of your parents into context, and they'll look at your test scores through that prism. So that's a legitimate reason, right? So they can't be too granular and punctilious in saying a certain score if they're doing holistic admissions, because there are different factors that are being taken into consideration. That's legitimate. But what's not legitimate a lot of times is they're too nebulous because they want people to like them. And, you're speaking to a group, and if you say, you know what, if you don't have a 1350, chances are really not good that you're going to be admitted. All of a sudden, you've alienated everybody. You've shut them down. They don't hear anything else that you're going to say. Now, part of that is understandable, though, because what if someone has a 1180, but now they take it again and they're at a 1350? If you alienate them, then they won't even hear what you have to say, and they'll shut you down and turn you off. So I get it. There's a saying, I don't know who started this, but I really like it. Test scores count more than we say, but less than you think. Did you catch that one?
I did. Yeah. Welcome to the real world.
Yeah, but the point is, when the combination of people being a little smushy in how they present it, coupled with the fact that all of us, human nature, have a tendency to hear what we want to hear, that's what really leads to people getting a misperception. I have to tell you the story, Nika. So I was visiting a school. Now, this was a high school, not a college, but it still applies. I took some students on a trip, and parents as well. And I was telling the parents before the test scores I've seen this school take for admission. All right. And so we go into the library for a presentation. The admission officers are not there, but they get like a dean, someone on the faculty, to do a presentation. She goes through and she says, test scores, we asked for them, but they're not that important. We look at blah, blah, blah. We look at essays. We look at character. We look at grades. We look at the transcript. We look at your recommendations. So we asked for them, but they're way down the list on what we actually look for. Now, I had told this mom who was on the trip something very different than that. So the mom, she turns around really, really slowly, like right in front of everybody, and she does this stare down on me. So two parents afterwards said, what was up with that? That was a little awkward. So then later, like the admission officer, he comes by, he's like, Mark, how'd it go? And I was like, to be honest, it didn't go well. And I call him aside. I was like, I've been trying to send the right kids to your school. So I've been very honest with the families and parents about what school, what you accept in terms of academics and test scores. And then I told him what the person, very well intentioned, but what she said. And so then he pulled the whole group together and said, listen, I'm going to tell you something. It's not rocket scientist. We're looking for test scores kind of here, grades here, recommendations like here. And he straightened it up. But that's the kind of thing that I experience a lot where, and it's like, if I tell you one thing and then the admission officer says something else, who are you going to trust? They work at the school.
All right.
But they have to be political. I'm not saying they're always wrong, but just keep in mind, admissions officers have to be political sometimes. Yeah. And some are political when they don't need to be political. What are you thinking?
I honestly, I don't know. I'm gonna be honest.
You don't know? You're never speechless. You're like a laboratory of ideas.
But look at that story you just told. I mean, but that's the case, and that's a little frustrating, honestly. It's like it is or it ain't. But your best bet is to just go in and go as hard as you can, because you just don't really know. You just don't know, and it just depends on where you are at any given moment in time, and that is not clear. That is not direct. That is not clear. So I'm just
here's
saying.
what I will say. There's research out there. Sure, there are 1,000 test optional colleges, and I'm not talking about the test optional colleges. I'm talking about the other 3,000 that are not test optional. Every year they're surveyed what's the most important factors for you in your admissions decisions, and test scores is always in the top 3. It's always grades and hard courses, test scores, and overall grades. Okay? And that's year after year after year is in the top 3. It's either number 2 or number 3. I'm part of working with a lot of students to do fly-in programs all around the country. And before a school flies you in and they pay for you to come on out, they will ask a couple things, and they will almost always, without exception, they'll ask to see your transcript and they'll ask to see your test scores. And they wouldn't do that if it wasn't important.
Yeah, and let's just keep it at that forever.
Hey, we're trying to keep it real. We could have called our podcast the Keep It Real podcast.
It's all we can do.
Friends, you're in for a treat. Our interview is with one of the real giants in the profession. Miss Nancy Beane is past president of the NACAC, National Association of College Admissions Counselors. She's been in the field for multiple decades. But we are going to tackle one of the hardest questions for me and for her in the profession. And that question is simply, how much emphasis should you put on prestige? How much emphasis should you put on name recognition when you're making your final admission decision? It's got a lot of nuance. It's not black and white. But listen, I think you're going to enjoy my interview with Nancy Beane.
Next week in the news, the Harvard admission trial puts the school's dirty secrets on display. And we'll be in chapter 43 of 171 answers. And we're talking about whether it matters if you take the SAT or the ACT. And next week's question is from a mom who wants to know how to get scholarships when your child is already in college. Ooh, that's going to be a good one. And Mark is wrapping it up with Miss Nancy Beane of Westminster Schools and the final part 2 of how much emphasis should be placed on prestige in selecting a college. And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, I am super excited today. We have a very experienced college counselor with us. We have Nancy Beane, who is currently the Associate Director of College Counseling at the Westminster Schools in Atlanta and a former president of the National Association of College Admissions Counseling. Welcome to Your College Bound Kid, Nancy.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you.
So Nancy and I first met by a college fair that we used to have at KIPP. She would come over and we would always have her do a panel for us, always. And then now we actually combine, Westminster, Lovett, and KIPP. We all work together on a huge college fair. And so I still get to work with her in that capacity. But Nancy's well-known, well-respected throughout the country for her knowledge and a good networker. So Nancy, why don't you kick it off and just give us a little introduction. Tell us a little bit about your bio. I know you've got over 40 years in education and 27 years in college counseling.
I'm old, but I still love what I do. I started teaching 44 years ago. And if you count my student teaching, I've taught every grade level but 8th.
Wow.
I've taught in inner city schools, in big public schools, in small rural schools. So you name it, I've done it.
I love it. Awesome. And right, tell us a little bit about your role as president of NACAC.
NACAC, the National Association for College Admission Counseling, is an organization of almost right at 15,000 people. It's made up of college counselors, admissions professionals who work on the college side in colleges or universities, people who are members or who work for CBOs.
Listeners, if you're not familiar with the term CBO, a CBO is just an acronym for a community-based organization that functions a lot like a college advisor does at a school. A lot of CBOs, although not all CBOs, have a mission to focus on under-resourced and underrepresented students
who are independent counselors. And all of us together, along with other organizations like KIPP, join together to work as hard as we can with students in terms of what colleges they choose, helping them along on one more step in the journey of life. And I've done that at Westminster now for 27 years, so I'm starting on my 28th year. And NACAC does a tremendous amount of what I think is very good work. There's a website that people can go to. It's www.nacacnet.org. And there's a wealth of information there that individuals can get even if they're not members of NACAC. So the purpose of the organization is to provide opportunities for students, but also protection for students in terms of helping them to know what their rights are and what their responsibilities are in terms of the college process, the application process.
And listeners, I'm going to tell you, you don't get to be president of NACAC without being highly respected in the field. So we have another thought leader here with us today. And, our regular listeners know I like to talk to our guests in advance and ask what their passions are. And I had a great conversation with Nancy, and there's so many different things that she could speak on. But the thing that she identified as an area of passion, I knew right away this was the topic for us today, was how much should a family, a student, a parent, how much emphasis should they put on the name of the school, the prestige of the school? And this is a difficult conversation, but we're going to take it on and answer the tough questions. So Nancy, let me start by asking you this. Most families believe that graduating from, college or university with a household name, it has value, a lot of value. Do you feel most families put too much emphasis on that, not enough emphasis on it, the right emphasis? Love you to just comment on that. And if you have any stories, feel free to share them.
That's a really hard question. And I certainly see students and parents every day. And often they are concerned about, I want my child to go to a good school, or the student says, I want to go to the best school I can. And it worries them at times that if they choose a school that doesn't have a prestigious name or isn't ranked highly, they may not be able to get the kinds of jobs they want. And that's the number one thing today. I think particularly since the recession, they worry more about whether the particular school they attend will prepare them well for careers. And I spend a lot of time getting to know my students and my families to make sure that they understand what's most important is what's the best fit for you as an individual. So there's so many things you need to consider when you're looking at what might be my best fit. Do I want to go to a large school or a small school, an urban school, a rural school, a school in a college town? What's important to me? Do I want the school to have particular activities, fraternities, sororities? Do I want big football games? Do I want religious activities? What do I want in a school? And once you've begun to think about that kind of thing, then if possible, it's important to go visit schools. And if you can't afford to go visit in different parts of the country, hopefully there's some schools around you that you can go see that might fit the bill in terms of the kinds of schools. The other thing you can do is read about schools. But what's most important is what is your best fit. And I think one story to demonstrate that is what happened to my own niece. I was very excited about Carrie's choice of schools. She was going to the flagship university for the particular state in which she lived. And a flagship university is the one that usually has, more research, that is the most well-known school in the state and so forth. So she was going to that school, and I thought, this is perfect. She got there and she was totally overwhelmed. She had been a good student in high school, had attended the local community college her last year of high school because she was through with all of her courses. And that happens in many of our schools today, where students do move on to college courses during high school, particularly if they're not taking APs or IBs. And so she had been there. And she was miserable in that large flagship university. So at the end of first semester, much to my horror, she transferred back to the local community college, finished there, and ended up going to a smaller state university near her hometown, graduated with honors from there, and had a wonderful, wonderful time at this university. So I was totally wrong about what was important to her in terms of her school. Now, that's one small segment or one small example of what you can and can't do. But it was an
I
important
really,
one
really
for her.
appreciate you emphasizing that there's nothing really more important than match and fit, and it's got to be right for each student. Where I find it challenging for myself as a counselor when a family asks me, okay, I do believe there's some value to certain names, but how much value? And should I be willing to pay more? And if so, how much more? And it's difficult. I mean, I'm thinking of families right now. I'm thinking of a family I worked with 2 years ago. Mom graduated from Harvard and felt that it absolutely has helped her in her career. Another family I'm working with now got an advanced degree from a profit online school, and she feels that has been a hindrance to her in certain jobs. So I'm not comfortable saying to families that there's zero
Right.
value, but how much value and should they be willing to pay for it? That's a tough one. So how would you answer that if a family said that, asked you
Oh, I
that question?
I have lots of experience with that kind of question, and I think it's a good one. I really do. So there are books, there are articles, there's research that people can go to for those kinds of answers. One article was written, and I'm not sure I'm saying her name correctly, Gillian, Gillian White, in Atlantic in August of 2017. And she talked about the fact that for certain majors, it seems to matter more. Maybe for business majors, maybe for social science and education, and it matters more in terms of their potential earnings, but I don't know how much more it matters. And the other thing she mentioned, and I thought this was interesting, that there didn't seem to be any real difference for engineers in terms of whether they went to the most prestigious schools. And I wouldn't have thought that. She also said that for humanities majors, for the most part, it did not make any difference between the top tier schools and the next tier ones. For science majors, it didn't seem to make any difference. And that to me is a total shock. Another book that is particularly important, I think, is Frank Bruni's book that says where you go is not is not who you'll be. And that's a book that reads quickly and has lots of examples in it. And I think it's a book that parents can read. The important thing is that for parents, your job is to set the parameters for your child. It can be geographical parameters, financial parameters, but it can also be, I didn't send you to, if you went to a prep school or if you went to a particularly strong public school, I didn't send you to this school to have you choose school X. So the parent can set that parameter, and you put all of those things together, and that's what really matters in terms of how you select a school. So that's important. There are other books. Jeff Selingo's There Is Life After College is another. There's all sorts of research that's been done by Bowen and other people who have said it can matter, but it's more in terms of earnings, but it's also, there's so much in it, it's a little bit hard to express. But I will tell you that I think what's really important is for the student and the family to investigate, to really explore, to be open-minded about what might be the best fit and what's important to you.
And listeners, I swear I did not have a conversation with Nancy ahead of time about Frank's book. Nancy, this is a book I frequently bring up and tell all of our listeners, spend the $10, get it on Amazon. Where you go is not who you'll be. And then, the subtitle is about tamping down the mania that's out there in college admission. So that was not planned, but you're hearing it from two people. We're both strongly recommending you to read that book because we feel that book kind of puts things in perspective. But it is a difficult conversation to have. And I hope you heard Nancy say it, it can matter more for some majors more than others.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, many of you know that I'm a college coach for KIPP Metro Atlanta schools in the day. And there are 5 of us on the college counseling team. So the other day, I was working with my colleague, Lucia, and she had collegedata.com up on her screen. Now, that's a very favorite site for a lot of us on the KIPTU College team. But I noticed her screen looked different than my screen. So I'm like, Lucia, why is it that when I click overview on college data, I'm not getting what you're getting? Because I like what you're getting a lot better than what I'm getting. So she showed me a tip, so I have to give her a shout out for this. When you go to collegedata.com, you want to do the search. So you put the college search box, and you put the college in, whatever you want, and the name will pop up. And then you're going to need to click it one more time. But when it pops up the second time, you'll see 6 tabs, all of which are great. Overview, admission, money matters, academics, campus life, and students. I don't want you to click those right now. I want you to click the name of the college for a second time. Once you click that college for the second time, you're going to see a big, bold, capped headline that's going to say college profile. You go over to the middle of the page and you'll see a save bar. And then you're going to see a couple other buttons. And then you're going to see 2 PDFs. I want you to click the second PDF. That's a taller PDF. Because when you click that, you will have at your disposal a voluminous amount of information that is fantastic on any college in the country. It's normally 15 to 17 pages, and it is rich. So the recommended resource for episode 42 is not just collegedata.com, but it's that PDF that gives you a detailed profile of any college you're interested in. Now return to my interview with Nancy Beane. Another thing, Nancy, do you feel it matters more in initial jobs, would you say, coming out of college, more so than mid-level career type of opportunities? Or do you see any difference there?
Ooh, that's a little bit of a hard question, too. I remember that we had an admissions dean who said to us, and he was talking about hiring people for his admissions office, and he was at a very selective school. And he said, I might hire the person that went to the more selective school initially, but once they cross the threshold, it matters not at all where they went to school. And what matters is what can they do, how much can they contribute to my particular organization. So I think sometimes it seems to open some doors. The other thing we hear about going to more prestigious schools is the networking that seems to take place there. I don't think it's at all impossible for networking to take place from any school, but the networking can be quite good. So perhaps to some extent that there, but I will tell you, I believe as strongly as I can that what families should not do is to reach out and borrow tremendous amounts of money, because honestly, we have no idea who is going to do what in the next few years in terms of careers. If you borrow $100,000, $150,000, being able to pay that back just may put you in such a fix that it's ridiculous. So I would not. My advice to families is if you can go wherever you go, however the school is ranked, if you can go to a school and not borrow more than $20,000 to $25,000 over the 4 years, that's fine. That's buying a car. I think you can do that. But if you borrow a tremendous amount of money, you may be putting yourself into a state that you really don't want to be in.
And I totally concur with that. And so I thank you so much for sharing that. Another, I think, important conversation for us to have, Nancy, is there are so many amazing colleges that the average person hasn't heard of, but they are extremely reputable when it comes to both grad schools as well as employers. Employers know they're great. Grad schools know they're great, but the average civilian hasn't heard of them. Do you want to comment on that?
There are just so many great schools out there. I'm always telling our students there are probably 100, 200 schools you could go to and get just as good an education. And you have a quote in what you put out that I think is important. And basically it says your attitude matters more than your aptitude and your altitude and how far you'll go. And so the most important components that we see in students who are successful in college, but also in life, are people who have determination, people who are willing to persevere, people who have what everybody calls grit. That's a tremendously important factor. If you've got those kinds of factors and you're willing to work hard, you can go almost anywhere. My husband was a lawyer and worked for a large Atlanta law firm in Atlanta, yes. And he said that there were two young men who were at Harvard in law school. Now, Harvard is certainly well rated for law school. And I got interested in where those two young men had gone to undergraduate school. And I won't mention the name of the school, but it was a much lesser known flagship university in a particular state. So clearly those two people had very good grades at that flagship university because they would not have gotten into Harvard Law School if they had not. So two things. One, I think where you go to graduate school can make a lot more difference in what you're doing. And that's a personal opinion. I don't have the factual basis for that. But where you go to undergraduate school matters as much or more for the experience that you have, the kind of person that it makes you. I happen to go to a women's college, Agnes Scott College, which is near Atlanta. And I can tell you right now, it transformed me. And I don't know that I realized it in the first couple of years, but it was a tremendous boost to my voice, to being able to find my own voice, to believing that I was smart. I was in a small school where I got a lot of individual attention. I don't think you have to go to a small school to get individual attention, but I think you have to be much more assertive if you're in a large school. So whether you start at a community college, or you start at a small liberal arts college, or you start at a small college or university near your hometown, you can go anywhere if you've got the determination, the perseverance, the grit, the willingness to work hard and to make a name for yourself. You can't sit back in your room and expect that everybody's going to come to you and make you into something, give you a voice and so forth. But if you reach out to others, get involved in your community wherever you go, you shouldn't have any trouble. So examples. There is the president of Georgia State University who makes a lot of money, frankly, and he started at a community college. There are a lot of well-known people who started at community colleges. There are a lot of well-known people, including some presidents of the United States, who went to colleges that you and I may never have heard of, and yet they became highly successful. So I definitely think it's important in terms of figuring out what's best for you.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you shared that, Nancy, because, once you get into an employment situation, you have to produce. And people that produce, people that are good at what they do, people that show personal integrity, as you said, work hard, have grit, people that are good relationship builders, those people are going to do well. And those people went to all kinds of schools, including community colleges. And so I think sometimes people skills is underrated. Integrity is underrated. As you mentioned, hard work and grit, all underrated in terms of what translates to life success. So, now you mentioned flagship schools. I think sometimes they're underrated as well, because I don't know if you agree with this, but I'll ask you, they have tremendous name recognition in the state and they have large alumni networks. And so they have a lot of potential for people to both network and have some name recognition. Now, I'm not trying to steer everyone to flagships because they're not for everybody, but sometimes just from a name recognition standpoint, the flagship in whatever state you're in, and as well as other well-known schools, may be more well-known than a highly selective small private school. Would you agree with that or not?
No, I think that can be true. And I think in our own state, the University of Georgia, we have a fair number of students who go there every year. They do incredibly well, and they have done incredibly well in their careers. I know more about the University of Georgia and Georgia Tech because so many more of our students go there than a lot of other schools. But take any state in the union, and you can find great opportunities at those. I think what I've told my students is you need to be a little more assertive if you're in a larger public university. Find your particular area that is strong for you and take advantage of opportunities that are there. There are so many opportunities. So if you go, and again, I'm going to use Georgia, but if you go to the University of Georgia, and you want to do internships, there are tremendous numbers of those for you. Not only are there internships, but there are opportunities for research. They have the CURO, Center for Undergraduate Research Opportunities. So there are so many ways for you to get involved and to really make that large university smaller. I've had very few students who've gone, unlike my niece, Carrie. Most of my students who've gone to the flagship universities in Georgia have certainly done well, whether it's Georgia Tech or the University of Georgia, and it can be any of the state universities. But no, the flagship universities have a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, and just to concur, I certainly would agree. I've been at Georgia now since 2009. I was in Pennsylvania from 95 to 2009, and Penn State had a tremendous network there. The network amongst Penn State was quite robust. And I've lived in Michigan for almost 5 years, Michigan and Michigan State, huge networks. And I was in Texas for 7 years, and University of Texas, Austin, Texas A&M. Some of these schools had huge networks. Now, we're not implying, though, that you should just go to a flagship. And I'm really glad you highlighted Agnes Scott, one of my favorite schools, by the way. So, because it's all about the match, it's all about fit. And some people will thrive better in that smaller environment than they will in the larger environment. Friends, you're in for a treat in the second half of our interview with Nancy Beane, the Associate Director of College Counseling at the Westminster Schools in Atlanta and a previous president of NACAC, the National Association of College Admissions Counselors. In the second half, Nancy will talk about the value of non-flagship regional colleges that are often particularly strong in a particular major. She'll also talk about online schools, and she'll talk about some great success stories she's experienced from students getting online degrees. Then Nancy has a very great nuanced perspective on for-profit colleges. And you're going to want to hear what she has to say. It's quite astute. Then we transition, and Nancy will give her perspective on college rankings. She'll also talk about several excellent books that she recommends students and parents read. Then I'm so happy because Nancy goes off script, and she shares 4 great tidbits that are not at all related to our topic of the prestige or the name recognition of a college. They're just insights that are so wise that they will help every single student who listens to them, and they will be worth your 20 minutes just to hear these insights. Then Nancy warns parents not to put too much pressure on their students, and she talks about the consequences of putting too much pressure on your child to go to a prestigious school. And then I close with the fun part. I put Nancy on the hot seat. Nancy closes our interview with some more outstanding wisdom for students and parents.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you find this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send it to someone you know who could really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. Marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And Your College Bound Kid is produced by Esteban Sartho. If you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you would like to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text at area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on each show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.